Welcome to another lecture by MedicoMedics, Physiology Chapter 8, Motor System and Reflexes. We begin this lecture asking, what is the motor system? We will talk about the organization of the motor system, discuss concepts like voluntary movement, reflexes, take some examples, move towards clinical relevance of reflexes, and as always, end with a summary. Now let's talk about the motor system, the part of our nervous system responsible for making the body move. Now the motor system is what controls both voluntary and involuntary movements. So everything from walking, waving, to reflexively pulling your hand away from a hot stove, that's the motor system at work. And it is divided into two main components. We have the central nervous system, the CNS, which includes the brain and the spinal cord. And this is the command center where movement is planned, initiated, and coordinated. Second, we have the peripheral nervous system, or PNS. This part connects the central nervous system to the actual muscles. And it's made up of motor nerves that carry those commands given to us by the CNS out to our skeletal muscles, allowing for the contraction and relaxation needed to generate movement. Now, functionally, the motor system handles two major types of actions. We have voluntary movements like walking, talking, or writing, so movements that we consciously control. And we have involuntary movements like reflex arcs or muscle tone, things that happen automatically without conscious effort. Let's now look at the organization of the motor system, focusing on its two key neuron types and their pathways. So first, we have the upper motor neurons. These are located in the motor cortex of the brain, and their job is to plan and initiate voluntary movements, sending signals down through motor tracts to the spinal cord. Next, we have the lower motor neurons. These are found in the anterior horn of the spinal cord and the cranial nerve motor nuclei in the brainstem. Now, they are the final messengers, so they directly innervate skeletal muscles, causing them to contract. Now, let's briefly cover two main types of descending motor pathways. We have the pyramidal tracts, like the corticospinal tract, and these control precise voluntary movements, especially for the limbs and digits. And we have the extrapyramidal tracts. These help regulate posture, balance, and more autonomic or involuntary movements, often via structures like the basal ganglia and brainstem. Now, damage to the pyramidal tract, for example, often leads to weakness and loss of fine control, while extrapyramidal damage shows up as rigidity, tremor, or abnormal postures. You can think of Parkinson's disease as a key example here. Now, let's walk through the basic steps of voluntary movements, a process we use constantly, often without thinking. So first, we have motor planning, which happens in the motor cortex of the brain. This is where the brain decides what movement to make, when to make it, and how to make it. It's a highly coordinated step that often also involves the premotor cortex, supplementary motor area, and even input from the basal ganglia and cerebellum. So again, this is where the brain decides what movement to make, when, and how. Good. Next comes signal transmission. All right. Once the plan is made, upper motor neurons now carry that signal down the spinal cord through specific motor tracts, like the corticospinal tract, for example. This step ensures the message reaches the right level of the spinal cord. And this is where you can now connect when we talked about descending tracts and the pyramidal tracts in the previous slide. So once the upper motor neurons send signals down the spinal cord via these motor tracts, then we reach muscle activation. So lower motor neurons located in the spinal cord or in the brainstem receive the signal and send it directly to skeletal muscles, triggering contraction. And finally, we have feedback mechanisms. So as movement begins, sensory input like proprioception and tactile sensation flows back to the brain, allowing for real-time adjustments to improve precision and coordination. So even a super simple action like picking up a cup involves all four steps: planning the reach, sending the motor command, activating arm muscles, and adjusting grip and angle based on adjusting your grip and angle based on the feedback that came back to your brain. And this entire loop of plan, send, act, adjust is what allows voluntary movement to be fast, smooth, and accurate. So what exactly are reflexes? Well, by definition, reflexes are rapid, involuntary responses to stimuli. So movements that happen automatically without conscious thought. And the main purpose of reflexes is protection and maintaining homeostasis. So think of them as built-in safety systems. For example, the withdrawal reflex pulls your hand away from a hot surface before you even feel the pain fully, protecting you from injury. Now, there are two main types of reflexes. We have monosynaptic reflex and polysynaptic reflex. Now, a monosynaptic reflex involves just one synapse between a sensory and a motor neuron. A classic example is the stretch reflex, like the patellar reflex. So you tap the tendon and the leg kicks. It's fast and simple. Then we have polysynaptic reflexes, which involve multiple synapses, usually with interneurons in the spinal cord. Now, these allow for more complex responses, like the withdrawal reflex, which coordinates multiple muscles to move a limb away from harm. So let's break down the reflex arc components here, or the reflex arc, which is the basic circuit behind any reflex. So first we have receptors. So a receptor detects a stimuli or a stimulus. A sensory neuron carries that information to the central nervous system. An integration center, often in the spinal cord, processes it. Then we have a motor neuron sending out a command. And finally, an effector, usually a muscle, carries out the response. So, for example, as we mentioned here and we've illustrated here, the knee-jerk reflex, also called the patellar reflex, is a classic example of a monosynaptic reflex. Why? Well, again, it involves only one synapse between the sensory neuron and the motor neuron. And there are no interneurons involved. So briefly, what is the mechanism? Well, tapping the patellar tendon stretches the quadriceps muscle. This stretch is detected by muscle spindle receptors. A signal then is sent via the sensory neuron to the spinal cord. In this case, it's L2, L4, lumbar 2, lumbar 4. Now, it synapses directly with a motor neuron. The motor neuron stimulates the quadriceps muscle then to contract, and that leads to the leg kick, seen in the patellar reflex test. Beautiful. Now, since we've already covered the knee-jerk reflex, let's move on to the withdrawal reflex. So imagine touching a hot surface. Your hand immediately pulls away. This is a polysynaptic reflex involving pain receptors, interneurons, and motor neurons. Its role is simple but vital: protection from injury by removing the body from harm as fast as possible. So the slide here shows the withdrawal reflex. Now let's say you touch something hot, right? Like a flame or a stove. The pain receptors in the skin detect the stimulus, and a sensory neuron carries the signal into the spinal cord. Now, inside the spinal cord, the signal passes through at least one interneuron, often multiple, before it activates the motor neurons that contract the flexor muscles. And this causes you to withdraw your limb quickly before your brain even fully registers the pain. And because this involves multiple synapses, it's called polysynaptic. And it allows for more complex coordinated responses. And then number 3, finally, we have the crossed extensor reflex. So a good example is stepping on something sharp. The injured leg withdraws while the opposite leg extends to maintain balance. Now, this reflex is more complex, involving both sides of the spinal cord. And its purpose, though, is to preserve balance during withdrawal. So together, these reflexes mentioned showcase how the nervous system protects the body, maintains stability, and reacts without needing conscious input. Now, reflex testing is one of the most valuable tools in the neurological exam. It gives us fast, reliable clues about where a lesion might be. So in general, hyperactive reflexes point toward upper motor neuron lesions because inhibitory control from the brain is lost. If we see absent or diminished reflexes, it will suggest a lower motor neuron lesion, meaning the reflex arc itself is damaged. Let's take two classic examples of abnormal reflexes. One is the famous Babinski sign. So when you stroke the sole or the bottom of the feet here, normally your toes should curl inwards or outwards, let's say. However, a positive Babinski sign, what happens is when you stroke the sole of the patient's feet, the toes will fan out. So they spread apart. And this is a hallmark of upper motor neuron damage. And it's normal in infants, but always pathologic in adults. Another sign or example is clonus. These are rhythmic, involuntary muscle contractions, often triggered by sudden stretch. It's another sign of upper motor neuron dysfunction, usually seen in more severe or chronic cases. Now, why does all of this matter? Well, reflexes help us localize neurological injury. So spinal versus peripheral, central versus segmental. They're simple fast and incredibly informative at the bedside. So in summary then, the motor system is responsible for both voluntary movements like walking or riding and involuntary actions like reflexes. Upper and lower motor neurons work together in a well-coordinated pathway. Upper motor neurons initiate the command, and the lower motor neurons carry it out at the muscle level. Reflexes, though automatic, play a vital role in protection and balance, helping the body respond quickly to danger and maintaining posture without conscious effort. And finally, reflex testing isn't just a routine, it actually gives us important diagnostic clues about the integrity of the nervous system, helping us localize injuries and distinguish between central and peripheral lesions. And that's the end of this chapter. Continue now to chapter 9. Thank you for listening.